Yo boys and girls, Marcel Kiefer here, and I'm driver for Rebel Racing Esports in the Formula 1 Esports series, and today we are going to talk about car setups in the F1 2020 game. Quali, race and wets, we are all going to cover these three off, what you have to look out for so you can maximize your car setup in the game. Let's get into it. Alright, here we go. So, setups. We are gonna cover off quali, race and wet setups. This year's game, it's relatively simple to build your setup. Honestly, I will show you, I'm not gonna be able to show you our esports setups or anything like that, but I can give you general ideas where to go and how you kind of progress in a setup. So first of all, of course, the wings, really important. You look at the track characteristics, like for example, we are currently on Austria. You would look at the tracks and see, okay, you're a lot of times full throttle, so you need a lot of top speed. So you kind of want to go lower wings. But then there's the middle sector and the final two corners where you really need to send the car into the corners to gain time and still have the traction. So you kind of need to make compromises with top speed and cornering speed, and that's a lot of fine tuning. So you have to check what works in the car. Let's say here you want to go for a bit more balanced kind of wing, so you could probably even run something like this, or I don't know, something in that regard. You don't want it to be too low, but you don't want it to be too high, so you kind of have to make compromises. Let's just go for something like 4.6 for now, just as an example. And also what I want you to know, because in the last games there was a lot of setups with one wing at the front. This year, I can only recommend you avoid it as much as you can, because you need that front end downforce. The handling of this year's car really rely on the front end, so you kind of need at least a two wing and then create the rotation from other areas in the setups, which I will go into in a couple of seconds, but stay away from one front wing, it's not really good. Okay, the transmission this year with the differential is so easy. 50% on throttle is the best. Simple as that. So if you wonder what the differential is doing, it's locking the tires to, like it's forcing it to spin in the same direction or to spin in like each own direction. So let's say you go into a corner where one tire has to spin more. If it's locked, then it's getting forced to spin at the same speed as the other one, or the other one is getting forced at the same speed as the other side. You know what I mean? And if it's not locked, then you have a bit more room and you get also more rotation. It kind of makes the car even more loose, but with this here on throttle, it works. The car sticks and you get more rotation. You can be a bit more aggressive and it's not bad. Talking about like these kind of things, the off throttle differential is a bit different. It works in the same way, just like not that it activates whilst you're on the throttle, so accelerating. It's when you coast or if you brake. So usually in cornering zones. So there you see a huge impact of that. And you can run it from 50 to, I would say, 60, something in between there. You have to like play a bit around what you like. You can actually generate a lot of difference by changing that already by 1%. It will either become more loose or it becomes more stable if you go 1% like to the right, so increase 1%. It makes a big difference, so play around with that. But I can tell you, if you go too low, let's say if you go 50-50 and then 50-60 once, you can immediately feel in the corners when you're braking or coasting that the car is more loose. You can just try it and get a feel for that, and then you have to play around and like see whatever works for you. Probably for most of you, something like 55-60 is better than the lower 50-55. But yeah, so in between there, that's the kind of range that you're looking for. With the suspension geometry this year, you can run it pretty basic, just right, left. That should already be all right. There's no real harm to it. If you need a bit more rotation, you can increase the front toe. If you need a bit more stability on the rear, you can also increase the rear toe. Can also play around with that, but to be honest, it makes not the biggest difference. So just keep it quite simple. You can run the right, left, no issue. That should be fine. Shouldn't really harm any of your lap times, and then you don't have to worry about that sequence here. It's pretty simple. It worked in the last year's games and it still does to some extent on this year's game, so this is somewhat all right. Okay, talking about, apart from suspension geometry, about the suspension. The suspension is a really crucial part on the setup. And this year you kind of want to run it a bit more aggressive so you get more rotation, but you don't want to run it too aggressive because that kills, first of all, your tires, and second of all, makes it really hard to drive. So you kind of have to play around and find a right like balance. You can run it one at the front, but you can also run it a bit higher and then play around with it. It's down to whatever you feel is right. On the anti-roll bar, it's the same. Like both have the same effects. If you like, let's say run a 111, 111, it's super loose and creates a lot of rotation, but you have little traction and it's really hard to control. So you kind of have to play around or like do something like this, whatever. You get what I mean. You have to balance it out, but you can also try to make one aggressive and the other a bit softer, and that generates a more soft feeling to the car, makes it also more stable and covers off the looseness from the other area. So it's all about the balance, but you have to work that out for you, what works for you. But just to make sure, you have to really nail this section here, because you can either ruin your setup or you can like make a really good setup. Because if you create too much rotation, you will probably hate it. If you create too little rotation, you will probably hate it. So you have to find the right balance so it feels nice and you also enjoy the driving. So make sure that you will find a good balance and try a lot around. It will be frustrating, but it's worth it. So go for something balanced. It doesn't need to be too aggressive, but you can also try some weird things out. Usually the more balanced stuff works, honestly. And you can also look at time trial, what these guys use, and make it more soft so it's a bit easier to drive. That's already kind of a good reference most of the time. So just go for something balanced and you should be fine. With the right side, you can also go for something really balanced. You don't want to run like 1-1 because there's no downforce. Car just doesn't work. Everything feels really like a mess. Stuff like 1-2 is also still quite low, 1-3 also, but you could technically run it. It's not an issue, but like 1-1, never run that. You don't want to go that low. You can run 3-3, 4-4, 2-2-2-3, something like that. You just have to work out whatever works with the setup. Especially this is a lot also depending on like the ratio between wings and right side. So sometimes you want to go a bit lower on the right side when you run these kind of wings, and the opposite as well. So it's just about finding a balance and trying around. I know that sounds really frustrating, but it is what it is. And it's the same for even all of us esports drivers. We're testing the setup so many times. I unfortunately cannot share you what we are running, but I'm just trying to give you a general idea how you would work on a setup if you would be in, let's say, our position, or also your position if you just want to improve your setups. So yeah, it's a lot of trying around, finding a nice balance, but I'm sure you guys will get there if you just keep holding on to these points that I'm giving you right now. With the brake pressure and the brake bias this year, pretty simple. We are usually running 100% and 50% during the race, during quali, during wets. Doesn't matter. But if you feel like you lose the rear a lot when you're braking and you don't want to touch like the differential, like the off-throttle differential, you can increase it by 1%, 2%, or even 3% to 53, and see if you lock up maybe too much at the front then, or if the car is actually having a nice balance. And that can help a lot, makes a huge difference. So keep this in mind. But it's pretty simple. Like these areas are really, really simple. And now we get to the tire pressure. The hardest thing in this year's game. Not really, it's just run it on minimum all the time. I haven't seen a single track where there's a benefit of running it higher. At least as soon as I tried it, I never really felt a benefit. I don't know if it's broken or if it's intended to work like that, but it doesn't matter. It works if you run it on minimum. So just do it, use it. It's a big advantage, especially on tracks like China or Sanford, where you have really hot tire temps usually. It lowers them quite a lot because the tire pressure actually affects the tire temps a lot, if you didn't know. So just run it on minimum settings and you will be fine. Let's get into the race thing. Like the race setups are not that much different from quali setups. Let's say you were running something like 4.9 in quali. In the race you want to overtake and defend, but you also want to keep a nice balance of the car so you can still push and go for optimal lap time. So you kind of have to make sacrifices between maximum lap time and being able to overtake and defend. So you kind of want to lower the wings as much as you can, but you have to try around. Maybe you go one at the front and one at the rear lower. Sometimes you can maybe go two at the rear lower, or sometimes two at the front. You just have to find a really, really good balance for the race. But it's quite simple. There's not a lot you have to do. It's literally these things. If you sometimes feel like the car's still too loose, then you can go up by 1% on the off-throttle differential. And in the suspension, what usually helps is softening the suspension by 1 or 2 clicks, maybe even the roll bar, and that's already enough, honestly. You don't have to overthink that. That should be already a good race setup. If you are happy with your quali setup, then just make these changes, make it a bit less aggressive, and it will be fine. Trust me, that should be enough. The game is not that complicated in that aspect. And now, looking at the wet setups, it's actually the opposite. Well, in the wing departure, departure, is that the right word? Well, in the wing area. So you actually want a bit more front wing because, like I said earlier, in this game, you rely a lot on your front end of the car. So you want a bit more turn-in, but at the same time, not too much, because if the front is getting too much turn-in and the rear is not getting the stability, then it's getting a bit messy and you won't like the traction. So you have to kind of increase both, let's say like 410 or something in that that example here, if that could work. You just want to go for something that is a bit higher, not too much, because you would also not be able to go for any moves, which is anyways already hard enough in the race, in the wet. But you want to go a bit higher on the wings, and you also want to go a bit lower on the suspension and the anti-roll bar, and that is already it, guys. It is really simple. The setups are not too complicated this year. I know it sucks that I can't give you any of the esports setups, but trust me, you will find the right ones for yourself if you just keep track to the tips that I just gave you. It is more like a guide that directs you towards the right setups than actually giving you immediately a right setup. But yeah, I'm sure it will even be fun for you to figure out what works for you best, what you like about the car, if you go a bit more aggressive, if you're a driver that maybe needs a bit more understeer and then drives around it, or someone that needs a bit more oversteer and it's just hyper smooth. All depends on your driving style and you have to figure it out for yourself. But I hope I could bring some light in that aspect for you, like what could work on the game, because some of you I know are probably sitting out there and are like, oh, where do I even start? Should I start at the wings? Should I start there? Maybe I need to run more front wing, less rear wing, or this or that. This kind of shows you already, okay, you go in this direction, this direction, this direction. And that's what I was trying to help you guys out with. And I hope you enjoyed it. If there are any more questions, let me know in the comments below, and also check out my Twitch channel. I'm live many times during the week, streaming consistently, and you can ask me also in the chat, ask me live questions, and if I see your questions, I will reply to it. Don't worry, you can ask me anything there. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time for the next kind of guide or tutorial. Until then, take care, guys. Bye bye.